Hello and welcome to yet another episode of People and Places, the special program at the AIDEM, where we explore the impact that ordinary and extraordinary people and places have had on the lives of people of repute, people who have made significant contribution to society and India. As part of this program, today with us is Balagopal Chandrashekar, Bala to friends, who has literally donned many hats, starting from his career as a bureaucrat, then as an entrepreneur, then the chairman of the Federal Bank, and of course, he is a mentor to very many institutions and personalities. Welcome, Bala, once again to People and Places. We have discussed people and places at various levels in this program. Today, I would like to look at your association with MS Valiathan. Valiathan has got Valia in it, which means big, a doyen. Literally a doyen when you look at Kerala's developmental history. A man who set up a large number of big institutions. A man who kind of ventured into new paths, bringing together technology and medicine, bringing together allopathy and Ayurveda. And of course, I know that you have some special association with him. Could you just start by telling us how you came across MS Valiathan?
This was in 1983 when I was still an IAS officer. I was about 30 years old. And I happened to be in Trivandrum for some personal work. And I was, this was preparatory to going back to Imphal to join my posting after a brief deputation in Kerala. So a friend told me about Sri Chitra Tirunal Institute and said that since you have got some free time, why don't you just drop in there and see what is going on there. So I called up his secretary and said I would like to meet him. And then to my surprise, he gave me an appointment because there wasn't any special reason for me to meet him. So I met him and then I asked about the work which is going on there in the institute. And then he referred me to the BMT wing, Biomedical Technology wing at the other end of the city in Modavamugal. And he told me to meet Professor A.V. Ramani, who is the head of the BMT wing. So I went to Modavamugal to the 24-acre campus there and met Professor Ramani. The meeting with Ramani had quite an extraordinary effect on me. And while I did not disclose my thoughts to Professor Ramani at that point, and I came out, my head was buzzing with ideas, and I thought I would like to do this. I would like to take up technology from this institute and be a pioneer in bringing it into the Indian market. And I was prepared to resign from the IAS also. So I went and had a talk with my parents about that, and they were very supportive, to my surprise. And then I went back and met Dr. Valiathan again. And then I told him that this was quite unexpected what happened. I went to think. So he was quite surprised. He was probably, to say surprised is an understatement. He was astonished. So he said, are you prepared to resign from the IAS? How old are you? I said, I'm 30 years old. So he said, are you prepared to resign from the IAS to do this project? I said, yes. And then he said, no, I'd like to understand something more about you. So I told him, sir, I'll be very frank. I have no money. I have no business background. I don't have a technical qualification. I am an economist by training. And I don't come from a business family either. So then he obviously the doubts were growing on in his face. So I told him, but if you give me an opportunity, if you give me some time, I will explain to you why I am confident that I will be able to do the project. So he said, yeah, I'd like to listen to you. Tell me what makes you so confident. And then I went ahead and I went through I thought about it long, even though it was just a couple of days. And then I told him what I said. See, obviously something in me must have struck a chord in him, because he told me, why don't you give a proposal? And why don't you say everything which you have told me in your covering letter? So actually, I think in my covering letter, I don't remember it now, but I think in my covering letter, I wrote, I don't have money, I have no experience. I put all the negatives out there, but I said that if I'll be able, once I know whether I'm going to be considered for the project, or I said I attach a proposal about how I will implement this project. And then to cut a long story short, I got the know-how. So that was my first meeting with Dr. Valiathan. Then subsequently, even though he was a director of the institute and very big position, I had no reason to go and meet him and trouble him very often. So I never went to say. I used to mostly deal with Professor Ramani in the BMT wing. But there were few occasions on which when I did have to meet him, and sometimes those were quite tough occasions, like he would have heard about a product complaint from one of the hospitals where clinical trials were being done, and he would have got quite disturbed by the complaint. And then I will have to hear him out, and then I will have to give my answer as to that. So those were difficult times, but I still remember that these occasions sharpened my understanding of the importance of quality in making medical devices. Why the tolerance level is zero tolerance, because lives are at stake. So there is no question of what is the tolerance level. There is simply no tolerance level. These are things which, from a purely engineering point of view, it's difficult for people to understand. So I was able to very clearly see this, and that complete clarity about quality, I think I got because of my interactions with Professor Valiathan, because he was absolutely uncompromising on that particular point. On any other point, he was willing to, because he said this involves patient safety, and so there's no question of any compromise on that. So that was my first encounter with this extraordinary person who started out qualifying as becoming one of the most qualified cardiothoracic surgeons and open heart surgeons in the world, trained with the best people like Denton Cooley and Charles Hufnagel in America. And then he comes back to India when most others of his generation were staying in big hospitals in the West and drawing big salaries. Dr. Valiathan comes back to India, and he goes back to his alma mater, which was PGI Chandigarh. And then he was where he did his master's, I think. And then he was working there for a while. That was when he got interested in some research. Very early in his career, he got interested in research, and he used to do research at Indian Institute of Technology, Madras. And I suspect that is where he came into contact with Professor Ramaseshan, who was then probably or who had already left IIT and was director of Indian Institute of Science or at the National Aerospace Labs. So Dr. Valiathan moved from cardiothoracic surgery, cardiovascular surgery to research, and this was there at the back of his, this was already brewing. So he was ready, and it is an amazing example of serendipity that while Dr. Valiathan was getting, this moving from surgery to research and back, C. Achyuta Menon, who was Chief Minister of Kerala, was looking for a person to head the Medical Research Institute in Trivandrum, which was where the royal family had agreed to fund the first part of the expense, and the Kerala government would take up the next part of the expense. That was how Sri Chitra Tirunal Institute was born. He invited Dr. Valiathan down, and Dr. Valiathan very gladly accepted the challenge, and that was the beginning of a great chapter in India's medical research and scientific research story.
Yeah, but then he was also a practicing surgeon, and his research kind of, had a very Kerala-specific dimensions, especially, he was somebody who thought that the research should not be just generalistic, but it should also kind of address local issues and specific issues related to the local population and community. Did you have any exchange with him on these aspects of his work?
Yeah, I mean, we all came to know about his work on endomyocardial fibrosis and these subjects which took, which got him very much involved, and he was doing a long research project on this because that was one problem which was noticed to be prevalent in the coastal areas of Kerala. And he was seeing a large number of patients, especially from the poorer areas who were being referred to him, were having this particular medical condition. So that was one thing about another great quality about Dr. Valiathan was the fact that he was interested in research which would benefit the people. And when he said benefit the people, he was talking about benefit the people of the area, the community where the institution was located. That was the primary kind of concern. And this, I am afraid, actually is a problem which many research institutions across the country face, is that the research they do seems to have very little to do with the communities which they are embedded in, and which have many problems which require, whether it is healthcare, whether it is economic, whether it is engineering, whether it is agricultural, the problems which researchers study seem to be very distant and not proximal problems. Whereas Dr. Valiathan was very clear that the kind of problems which should be taken up are the problems which are affecting the the people itself. But at the same time, he also understood the importance of what he would call very basic research, because unless there was a strong foundation of basic research, applied research by itself would be only a very weak kind of initiative, because it is not backed by. So he wanted to develop in Sri Chitra Tirunal Institute some core competencies, and that is what led to the vision of setting up the remarkable biomedical technology wing, which is on a 24-acre campus, which is separate from the hospital wing, which is in the medical college campus, the other end of the city. This biomedical technology wing is a multidisciplinary research campus with the skills ranging from toxicology, animal house testing, materials characterization, polymer technology, because many of the materials used in modern medicine are made out of plastics. Earlier they were made out of glass or steel, but as important engineering plastics all became available, they started shifting to that. So all the disciplines which will have an impact or an influence on the selection of a material, the criteria for selecting that material, etc., need to be represented. So this multidisciplinary character of the Chitra Tirunal Institute is what probably makes it unique in India. Definitely, I think it must be a handful of such institutions across the world which have this multidisciplinary, and hence they are in a position to undertake these kind of research programs. And I believe Dr. Valiathan had a very major influence on determining this. So that's how focused he was on research. He said, all right, we're going to take up this problem, this kind of problems, to develop devices for these kind of conditions or these kind of prevalent medical problems in India. We need a research campus with the following capabilities, and he went ahead and developed all those capabilities.
Yeah. In fact, going back to what you said earlier, I mean, you actually went and met him and you expressed your idea to start a project where you came up with such a huge disclaimer. And I think in the current days of hard sell, where people sell themselves to institutions and projects and people, it would have been a completely absolutely different way of approaching things. But what does that say about that personality, and why do you think Dr. Valiathan was able to look at your disclaimer in a positive manner?
I think to achieve great things, to achieve remarkable outcomes, one has to be a risk taker. And cautious people who are afraid to take risks, just like in entrepreneurship. So, in a sense, Dr. Valiathan was also a very entrepreneurial scientist. He was a scientist who was willing to take risks. And I mean, I can't otherwise explain any other reason why he looked favorably on my proposal. Purely on the basis of his judgment of a person, the first impression he had, and the brief presentation I was able to make, because I could show him no track record, nothing. Whereas I know for a fact that at least two other serious contenders were there for the same blood bag know-how. One was a public sector organization and one was a large private pharmaceutical group headquartered in Ahmedabad. And overlooking those claims, he chose my proposal, which is actually quite an extraordinary decision. And in retrospect, I think what it tells me is that Dr. Valiathan had this very strong entrepreneurial streak in him, where he was willing to take risks. And even that, if even reflected in the progress of the Chitra Tirunal Institute itself. In all cases, he was sticking his neck out. He was taking on, say, very difficult projects. Like another project which he took on, which had no assurance of success, was the tilting disc synthetic heart valve project. Now, synthetic heart valves had been made only by 2 or 3 companies worldwide successfully. And in fact, many other attempts had failed. So to take such a difficult project, and why did Dr. Valiathan take it up? Because he said, this condition is a condition that many Western companies are finding is increasingly afflicting patients in the third world. Because by good preventive measures taken in childhood in the West, they were able to almost eliminate the danger of atrial valve malfunctioning happening and degrading happening by appropriate application of antibiotics and all that when people are young. But in a country like ours, where there was so much ignorance, these simple remedies were not applied, and therefore this was a problem. And therefore he realized that the multinationals are not going to be manufacturing many of these heart valves, and even if those who make it will charge a very high price for it, and therefore he chose that. So he stuck his neck out. Here was another case of taking a risk. He could have taken safer products which are assured of something coming out regularly, but he took a tough product, and they made such a great success out of it. Today there are but close to 200,000 patients in the world walking around with the Chitra valve ticking inside.
So basically, this is also a case of institution building, in the sense, it's very fashionable now to say that, that no institutions were built in the past in our state or in Kerala or in the country. But the experience of people like Dr. Valiathan, and also the intervention that the Chief Minister like C. Achuthamenon had in kind of bringing a person like that. So could you just tell us what is your perception about the institution building climate that existed at that point of time? How does it compare with modern times?
I think that was an extraordinary time, and unfortunately to me it seems to be an aberration in retrospect, because after that I have not seen any such attempt to build institutions of importance to the country and to the state. Achuthamenon's vision was that if the state has to develop, it has to develop because of public policy initiatives. So he was very clear about that, and it's natural given his political background, etc., that Achuthamenon should believe that public policy is what sparks off growth. And actually the growth history of every remarkable success story in Asia, the East Asian tigers, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, China, Malaysia, all as a case of success of public policy. It's not private enterprise which succeeded. That's a big misunderstanding of this about the success of all that. Achuthamenon alone, I think here in India, so which is why in the mid-70s, he foresaw the need. He used to take the advice of Dr. K.N. Raj and also Dr. P.K. Gopalakrishnan, who was secretary of the State Planning Board. These 3 people, including Achuthamenon, they used to sit down together and think about how should the state develop, because they realized that processing agricultural or spices and all that produced here in Kerala will only yield a certain limited kind of growth. It will not yield a strong growth which is capable of bringing prosperity for 30 million plus Malayalis. So for that, something else is needed. And then they arrived at that one of the public policy initiatives was to lay the foundation for a electronics manufacturing base. And why they chose electronics? It was a no-brainer, because they said that we don't have raw materials of any kind, industrial raw material. We only have some agricultural raw materials. And so if we try to do just based on locally available materials, it's going to be severe. Which is, all other industries are heavy material using industries where freight costs will become a major negative factor, because Kerala is located in one corner of the country, which was the only industry which did not have this problem, electronics, because these things are light, they can be flown in, the finished product can be flown out. It's not raw material intensive, it is know-how intensive. And that's how they decided to invite KPP Nambe. So at that time, here was the thinking which was going on, which was thinking very futuristically.
KPP Nambe who brought in Keltron.
He brought in Keltron. So you had KPP Nambe brought in Keltron. Then Achyuta Menon got Harsh Gupta to bring the Center for Earth Science Studies. The first Center for Earth Science Studies in India was set up in Trivandrum. Then the Center for Water Resources Development and Management. Water is supposed to be in plenty here in Kerala, but we still have water scarcity. So at that time, they decided you need a CW, RDM, which was set up in Kozhikode. 30% of the land cover in Kerala is under forests, but they had no research into that. They depended on outside research. So the Forest Research Institute, Pichi, was set up. Tropical Botanical Gardens and Research Institute at Palod was set up. Central Tuber Crops Research Institute was set up. It's amazing that after the decision was taken, Achyuta Menon government was so decisive that within 2-3 years, all these institutes came up, and they got down the right people also. They went inquiring. They didn't inquire whether the guy is a Malayali or not. They just said, who is the best in the business? Harsh Gupta was the best in the geology. They got him down. Dr. Valiathan was the best in his field. They got him down. Dr. Ganapati, who is from Coorg, was one of the great Forest Research Institute, researchers in Dehradun. They got him down from there. So like that, they got down all the best talent. So institution building, it required sagacity and vision in the political leadership, but it also required the right institution builders to be put in place. If politically favored candidates and all came in, no matter how good the vision, the institute would never have come up in the same way. So, for example, Dr. Valiathan's contribution in Chitra Tirunal, setting up a medical research institute and even setting up a biomedical technology wing may have been possible even without Dr. Valiathan. What was not possible was setting up an institution where the people would work with a work culture which is completely unique. I remember, I have seen this site many times of people coming who are bystanders of some patient. This is the one hospital where they're not allowed to go inside. They're not allowed to go into the wards and rooms and all that. Yeah. So
you have to stay outside.
They're up to the enquiry counter they can come. Yeah. So near the enquiry counter is those punch cards. The attendance punch cards are kept. So one of these old guys who was obviously from Malappuram, looking at his dress and hearing him and his attire and all that, he saw Dr. Valiathan walk in at 8:30, take a card, punch it and put it back and go. So he looked astonished. And so he thought he must have been imagining things. And then he went again and looked at that rack. And he could see it was MS Valiathan. And it was just above one guy, where some Varghese or somebody. So this old man, I saw him. He asked somebody, who is this? Panche, the director. And Aditha Kardo, the driver.
It was in alphabetical order.
It was put in alphabetical order. So the shock in the face of this person and slowly turning to great respect. And another incident, for example, so one thing was that this kind of egalitarian workplace, most of our workplaces in India are still feudal workplaces.
And hierarchical.
The bosses, and the top people, they'll have a separate dining hall and all that. It was only the Japanese companies like Suzuki and Toyota and all which came in, when they came into India, that you had the common cafeteria for everybody. Dr. Valiathan, Chitra Tirunal Institute had a common cafeteria for everybody. And I remember when K. Karunakaran was hospitalized after a bad motor accident,
The former chief minister.
He was a chief minister then. So he was in Chitra Institute and his condition was quite serious. So the governor, Mr. Rachaya, came at 5 o'clock or something to see him. The medical superintendent said the visiting time is over. Then they said, the ADC and all came and said, this is His Excellency the Governor. The medical superintendent said, hospital rules. And the governor, to his credit, the governor said, I respect the hospital rules. Then the medical superintendent said, sir, you can sign in the visitor's book. So they brought a visitor's book where he wrote a get well message and all that for Karna and he went back. No, I'm saying that is institution building. You're building character. It's based on a vision. It is not just a fancy, a high-tech hospital or a high-tech lab. That anybody can put up. But how do you transfer these kind of qualities, these kind of outlooks? That was one of Dr. Valiathan's great contributions, and I believe unacknowledged and unrecognized contributions.
Why do you say so?
Because I have not seen this in anywhere else. And B, many of the, I have heard that many of the doctors initially who also now have to punch cards and all that, were not very comfortable doing it. Because that medicine and healthcare is a very hierarchical profession. The top of the pecking order are the doctors. And then but great distance below them come the nurses and then all the rest of the thing. So here to be equated to everybody else in certain common procedures like punch card, eating at the same cafeteria and all that was all very revolting, completely revolutionary kind of stuff.
Well, this biotechnology experiment with Sri Chitra is something which we have seen and the world acknowledges it. I think, I have heard from international experts talking very highly of Sri Chitra. But then one area which I think, which Dr. Valiathan wanted to explore further was a larger collaboration between Ayurveda and allopathy. And I think he had expressed it on one of his visits to Kottagal Ayurvedishala when the legendary warrior was alive. But one cannot see any concrete signals of that kind of, in terms of institution building anywhere and even in Kerala. Why do you think is the reason for that?
See, Dr. Valiathan actually, after he left Chitra Institute, after his tenure was over, and then he accepted an appointment at the Manipur Academy of Higher Education as Vice Chancellor. He also became president of the Indian National Science Academy at that time. And at that time, one of his missions was to bring about this collaboration between Ayurveda and allopathy, modern so-called evidence-based medicine. So, he did a lot. In fact, I attended a lecture of his at the Rajiv Gandhi Center for Biotechnology in Trivandrum, where he said he is very disappointed at the kind of research subjects which researchers in biotech and medical institutions, modern science institutions in India are doing. Because he's saying most of you are aping the West. Your inspiration is all from the West, from the selection of topics, the design of the research project, etc. It's very clear where the inspiration is coming from. And I remember he made an extraordinary statement, which really was, for me, it was very inspirational. He said, he was giving this lecture on the occasion of his translation and transliteration, you can say, of Charaka Samhita, Charaka's great masterpiece. And in that, what he says is, Charaka was a man in a hurry because he had so much in his head which he wanted to put down, empirical intuition and empirical studies, etc. Right? He did not have time to do the proofs for many of them. Okay. So most of them were given aphorismically as very laconic sort of statements. But he said in each of those aphorisms or each of those verses or couplets or paragraphs, there were embedded enough material for 2-3 PhDs in each of those. And he says Charaka Samhita is several hundreds of pages of such aphorisms. So he said, why don't you just go there and use modern pharmacology, pharmacognosy, and bioavailability and biostatistics, and use all the modern methods of science to verify and validate and test all these propositions. That is research. And I feel that was an amazing project with a great vision. Unfortunately, it was not, he couldn't, I think, get enough people interested in it. Now there is a renewed interest in Ayush, and so for,
but that is very cosmetic. That is
so for probably the wrong reasons, there is a lot of interest that this is all supposed to be great Indian science, Vedic science and all that. See, there is great science in India which was done in those days, but it's not as if those were miracles. We need now to validate those things. So Dr. Valiathan was on the right course. What he said was, we have a priceless treasure trove of writings and work and findings of Charaka, Sushruta, and others of their time, which are all from 2000 years ago. Now, that should be, and he wanted to do research. For example, he gave another example in his talk, which I found remarkable. He says there is a category of medicines, like you have kashayams, you have lehyams, you have bhasmams. Now, the bhasmams are made, often prepared, using what is called heavy metals.
Yeah.
Now, heavy metals are proscribed for internal application by Western medicine, because Western medicine says heavy metals are deadly, lethal for the human body. But the bhasmams work and they are not toxic. So how come a heavy metal, what happens to the heavy metal in the preparation of the bhasmam, that this lethality is removed, but its efficacy remains? So he said he had got 6 big labs in India: National Chemical Laboratory, National Physical Laboratory, the Institute of Plasma Physics in Ahmedabad, and some 2-3 IITs, all to come together using nanotechnology and X-ray crystallography and all that to understand what happens to these heavy metals in the preparation of a bhasmam, and they feel the clue lies in the nano structure. Now, so Dr. Valiathan was talking about.
I have also done some journalistic work on this. I mean, though I am not an expert on medicine or this, especially on this metal-based medicines in Ayurveda. And my own experience is that for the last 27 years, these initiatives have been made, but they are all caught in the bureaucratic structure of the various governments were having various political ideologies. That I have also written extensively about that. But that's a different topic.
Yeah.
But then I am asking you one simple question. As an entrepreneur yourself, as somebody who has also been a mentor to a lot of institutions, how does one move forward to take forward Dr. Valiathan's legacy, especially because, we have that brain around in a sense, so.
Yeah.
So
now, Dr. Valiathan actually made a very wise statement. He said after his experience of setting up Chitra Tirunal Institute, running it for so many years, and then leaving, and then other people coming, and then the institute, his course, his trajectory going in a certain way. Not just Chitra Institute, he says, looking at many institutions in India, he came out with what he called something like some observation about the trajectory of institutions. So just like many other things, there is a initial phase where there's a lot of drive, passion, vision, sense of mission and all that. And then that starts petering off like an S-curve. It peters off, and then finally it goes into decline. And so what happens is, he says, then this will even affect selection of the people who come into the leadership positions. And you can't only blame them, because what happens is the wrong kind of people probably get into the institution for the wrong reasons also. So a combination of all, it is what he says is, I think one of his phrases was, institution building is like launching a rocket into space. You have to overcome gravity. You have to have the force. And it's not enough if you just fire it for 5 minutes. It has to keep going on for years. You still have to be firing that rocket engine years later. And if that kind of energy doesn't come, and it can only come from a leader and from the he said, if you have mentors and leadership like Achyuta Menon, then institution building is possible, because he would never interfere in anything with the institution. Gets the right man or lady, a scientist, and puts them in position, and then after that says, now deliver. What do you need for that itself. We don't have that kind of sagacity, that kind of very wise, far sighted kind of leadership today. And we have people who are, institution heads are changed for the worst reasons. And for purely, and once great institutions are being devalued across our country because of very opportunistic posting of the political camp followers and things like that. So once great universities are in decline, once great institutions are in decline, that's a tragedy. And unless our institutions are built up, how can the next generation of young people come up? And Dr. Valiathan represented in the sharpest way possible. And which is why he was so pleased when he went to Manipal Academy of Higher Education. There was an institution that started by a business community. People like TMA Pai and all that who are from the business community, who are bankers. And they come and set up an institution so far-sighted. They focus on things like the library and then the township around that so that there's comfortable stay and which will reduce the cost of commuting and everything. They were able to think so far ahead. And, also mobilize the savings of the people to invest into the institute, to let the institute grow, and made it into self-financing because there was no other funding which was possible. Institution builders, Dr. Valiathan went there and was able to do a remarkable job. He took the Mahe institutions to the next orbit.
Absolutely. As of course, Dr. Valiathan pointed out, I think a very important component of institution building are, of course, the leaders of the institutions themselves, but also the larger political climate and the political leadership. And one hopes that at least our discussion kind of rekindles some spirit in the larger political structure, and there is political will to kind of bring up new institutions and also strengthen new institutions. I don't want to end the discussion on Dr. Valiathan's contribution on a pessimistic note. So with that positive message, we'll end this. And of course, we will meet you again with yet another episode of People and Places. Thank you.